Our team does human research, so we're not in the wet labs. So where we're based is a really unique position where we have the psychiatric hospital down the road, which is Cumberland Hospital. And then we also have the hospital. We do a lot of work with radiology, so we do a lot of EEG and neuroimaging. So we get to actually ask research questions that are reflective of what the hospital needs, what the community mental health centres need. So our location is very unique. I'll explain a little bit of the work that we do, but hopefully sort of give you some sleep takeaways at the end of this. So I'm going to start by asking questions to you first. Show of hands. Do you think that some people only need 4 to 5 hours of sleep? Hands up for yes. Answer is yes. There are true short sleepers, but they're very, very rare. They only make up far less than 1% of the population, and it is a rare genetic variant. People who think that they are short sleepers actually show cognitive effects of like mild alcohol intoxication. Show of hands, is melatonin a sleeping pill? It is not. Melatonin is a natural hormone that's produced in the pineal gland, and it's not used to help with sleep depth, but it's about the timing. So it's a circadian timing signal. It tells our brain when it's time for sleep or when it's nighttime. So it's not a sedative per se. It's used often in jet lag, delayed sleep phase, so people that have an inclination to go to sleep really late, and circadian rhythm disorders. Well, can you catch up on sleep on the weekend?
Yes.
Who said yes? I wish. So it does, and it partially restores a little bit of alertness, but what tends to happen is social jet lag. I think this is a little bit of a buzzword at the moment, but essentially it takes away from your natural social hours, your natural work hours, and it doesn't reverse any of the metabolic or cardiovascular risks. And last one, is sleep passive rest? Hands up for yes. Sure. Is everyone nervous? Well, sleep is actually a very, very highly active neurobiological process. It's involved in memory consolidation, emotional regulation, metabolic clearance. In the last 10 years, there's a lot of research coming out, or a little bit more, about the brain removing bad toxins from the brain. So that's the glymphatic system. This looks scary. It's not. So sleep is not a single uniform state. During the night, we go through 4 to 6 cycles of sleep every 90 minutes. So we go through a light stage of sleep. So this is just a transition stage from wake to sleep. Stage 2 sleep, we see a lot of this kind of more faster brainwave activity. This is involved in memory processing. Slow wave sleep is where we get a lot of deep sleep. This happens in the first half of the night. So a lot of declarative memory, muscle repair, and this is where it's proposed that the glymphatic system clears toxins out of the brain. Later in the night, we have REM sleep. So this is where we dream. Everybody dreams, by the way. It's just some people remember it, some people don't. It's involved in emotional memory processing and fear extinction. So this is why sometimes later in the morning you might remember your dreams, or you might have more vivid dreams, because this is where our REM sleep occurs. This slide also looks scary, and it's not. So we have 2 models of sleep. The first is sleep pressure, and the second is circadian. A lot of this talk is going to be focused on circadian rhythms. This is our internal biological clock. It says to us when we want to go to sleep, when we're awake, when we're alert. So sleep pressure, it builds throughout the day, and it's built through adenosine buildup in the brain. And this is why caffeine works, because it blocks the adenosine receptors. Then our circadian rhythm, it's a biological clock. It's unique to each of us, so there is a strong genetic component to this, and it regulates our sleep and alertness. So you can see from, I don't have that. So from the blue line, that's our sleep pressure that builds throughout the day. And if our circadian rhythm is in line with the environment, they should move together. So then our circadian clock says, yes, if it all works perfectly, our circadian clock says, yes, it's time to sleep when we've built enough sleep pressure through the day. This is another frightening slide. The circadian system is a very, very complex one. And if you take anything away from this slide, is that light really governs our circadian rhythm. So all these artificial lights all throughout the day and all throughout the night is working against our biological clock. So light comes in from the retina and it hits that big clock called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's got that name because it sits on top of the optic chiasm. That's where it gets its name from. And then we have lots of little local clocks in other parts of the brain and in our bodies, in our liver, our heart. And light says to us, yes, it's time for alertness. And then when it's dark, it's supposed to signal it's time for rest. We have special retinal cells that can detect different types of light, like blue light. And then the circadian disruption occurs when we're getting light at inappropriate hours, which is when, we get the advice of put your phones away or laptops away before you go to sleep. It's emitting blue light, and blue light is suppressing melatonin. Obvious circadian disruption is when you have jet lag, particularly when you've traveled overseas, shift work, but our 24/7 tech world is getting us to the point where we're at shift work or jet lag all the time. And then there are a lot of consequences of this: metabolic disruption, mood disturbance, which is some of the work that we do, impaired cognitive function, and poor sleep quality. This is a little bit of the work that we're doing. So sleep disruption is a core symptom of a lot of mental health disorders. It is a core symptom in our diagnostic manual for a lot of major disorders: major depressive disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, PTSD. But increasingly now we're starting to look at it as an early marker, not just a symptom of. In 2017, out of 2,808 suicides, the peak suicide time was between 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. And based off this paper and a lot of research, we're looking at sleep as an intervention for suicide risk. In mood disorders, we see a lot of sleep symptoms that occur, and that can often be thought of as like a alarm system or a early warning system for relapse or clinical decline. So insomnia increases the risk of depression by 2 to 3-fold. It increases relapse in people who have been remitted from mood disorders. And we often see in manic episodes, which is a symptom of bipolar, that there's a whole period of sleep disruption and a decreased need for sleep prior to a relapse or a manic episode. So we really have this whole window, and it's not just a few days, it's a few weeks or a month that clinicians and mental health services can actually intervene before. In schizophrenia, we see fragmented sleep and irregular sleeping patterns in the weeks before relapse, or even just an increase in psychosis symptoms like hallucinations and delusions. This again is specifically the kind of work I'm doing at the moment, which is fairly new. So in PTSD, we see a lot of sleep disturbances. So during the night, there's elevated physiological hyperarousal, brain activity starts to get faster, REM sleep, which is important for emotional memory processing, it starts to get fragmented. And the consequences of that is that those traumatic memories then fail to integrate properly, and they remain alert, intrusive throughout the daytime. So with somebody who hasn't had PTSD can go to sleep, their memories are laid down, they're processed, but for PTSD, they sort of remain alert. There is no processing of those memories. Sleep then influences their emotional regulation ability, their ability to recover from stress and fear extinction. Some of the work that I've been doing at the moment is in early life stress and linking that back to adult sleep. So early life stress is extremely prevalent in severe mental illness. So this includes things like severe bullying, sexual and emotional abuse, neglect. It's prevalent in first episode psychosis, borderline personality disorder, and bipolar, and even in PTSD. And we see this link between the three, that early life stress can affect sleep as adults, and that might be, we don't know the process of why, and we're looking into potentially brain function as being one of those factors. So early life stress affects the brain structure, the brain function, and therefore affects sleep. A few of the common sleep treatments. So historically, sleep disturbances were treated as secondary symptoms. And like I said, we're looking at them as more preventative now. So the gold standard for insomnia is cognitive behavioral therapy insomnia. We call it CBTI. About 30%, up to 30% of the population has insomnia. So it's the leading sleep disorder after, followed by OSA. It has comparable efficacy to pharmacological treatments, so that's like benzodiazepines and other sedatives, but it actually has more durable long-term outcomes. So pharmacological treatments on its own are often not recommended. It's recommended to have it with CBTI. Medical treatments, the most common one is CPAP, and this is used for OSA. So OSA is obstruction to the airways throughout the night, and there's different severities of this. Some of the more emerging treatments are going to be around chronotherapies, particularly for severe mental illness. Melatonin seems to be something that I get asked about a lot. So it is a circadian timing signal, not a sedative. Australia's laws around this are very different to the US. So US, you can go buy bags of gummies and things like that. We don't have that here. And actually, we have very strict guidelines around melatonin, rightfully. Whereas in the state, it's, if I can use this word, a little bit more frivolous. So you can go to your pharmacy and you can get melatonin almost anywhere. The problem with that is melatonin's effectiveness is all about in the timing and the dose. So it's not just I'm tired tonight or I want to get a good night's sleep and I'm going to take it. And it's about the continuity of the use of melatonin. So in Australia at the moment, it's until 55 years old, you have to get a prescription. After 55, you can go to the pharmacy, but you can only get it for short-term use. And it's like 2 milligrams. So it's really, really small. Chronotherapies is something that we're looking at a lot. So manipulating sleep time, light time, a lot of research now about morning bright light therapy for mood disorders. So seasonal affective disorder, major depressive disorder, not for bipolar. Bipolar actually is shown to have a light sensitivity risk, so it could potentially increase the risk of manic relapse. And also in PTSD now, there's a lot of studies being done. Blue light blockers in the evening, the commercial consumer wearable space is exploding, and we'll get to that in a moment. So commercial use, your Garments, your Fitbits, your Apple Watches, they're huge, they're everywhere. The global wearable health tech market is projected to increase to 60 to 100 billion USD. This is something that we're looking at, and I think every year there's a new consumable coming out. So one is, getting bankrupt and there's a new one coming in. There's some that have lasted the test of time, like Fitbit. Actigraphy is something that we've used in sleep research since the early 80s. So this is not a new concept for us to measure rest or sleep times through movement. It is the most common measure of sleep-wake patterns to identify someone's circadian rhythm. But the most scientific way to measure circadian rhythm is to measure somebody's melatonin, and that's through dim light melatonin onset. It's a very cumbersome process that's done in a sleep lab. The sleep lab at Women does it, so you're essentially testing someone's melatonin through a 24-hour period every couple of hours. But your wearables are the best kind of proxy sleep measures. The gold standard for sleep, and I do have to say this, if you do have any sleep disturbances, the gold standard is a polysomnography. So that is going to the sleep lab, getting wires on your head, getting sensors on your body, and you stay there overnight. The consumer and research grade wearables actually now show pretty good agreement with a polysomnography for sleep duration and the timing of sleep and wake, but not for staging. I think I've used a Fitbit a long time ago, and I think it says whether you are in slow wave sleep or deep sleep or REM sleep. It's not true. They're not a good indication. You could almost disregard it altogether, but it has good. Are you looking at it? Yeah, it has other benefits. So I think it generally, for how much you've slept overall, it's pretty good. Somebody told me the other day that one of the consumables tells you about your sleep regularity, if it can measure your sleep timing well, then it can give you a good indication of your sleep regularity. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble with that. Now, clinically, we're starting to use this. There are a couple of sleep labs that use wearables clinically. So if somebody has insomnia, for example, or a circadian rhythm disorder, they'll get them to wear a watch for a few weeks. And this is kind of what we look at on the back end of it. So the blue is the sleep and wake times. And this is somebody who has a irregular sleep pattern. And this is information that you can't get from a polysomnography, from a sleep study. Oftentimes when people go in for a sleep study, they'll say, well, I slept rubbish. What could you actually tell from my sleep study? But the watch gives us that, and we use research grade watches, actigraphies, and we can see the yellow is the light. So this is from Philips, who got bankrupt from their actigraphy wearables, but a lot of wearables can actually show two different light waves, which is yellow and blue. And so we're able to track, how much light exposure are they getting? Are you getting blue light first thing in the morning? You should be getting natural light first thing in the morning. The blue shows us this is day to day over a 24-hour period. There's a lot of irregular sleep-wake times. So you've got 6 p.m. there, 6 a.m. in the middle, and the onset and offset times are different day to day. And this is the kind of information that we can use clinically to see, is somebody at risk of a relapse or a steep clinical decline? And so we use it for behavioral change, identifying these irregular patterns and circadian rhythm stability. I've mentioned some of the limitations, but wearables are often miscalculating rest times as sleep times. So sometimes your consumer grade wearables will overestimate how much you've slept because the watch can't actually measure sleep. It's just calculating rest as sleep. Total sleep time may be overestimated. Forget sleep staging. But it can also create some anxiety about perfect sleep metrics. And this is some research over the last 10 years, and it's called orthosomnia, which is obsessively looking over your results or whatever comes up on the cloud. And I know some, like the Oura Ring, can measure oxygen desaturation, but any sort of breathing concerns are really a polysomnography measure. So if you are snoring or you're getting obstruction through the night, the wearables are not going to detect that. This is some of the work that we've done. So this is a trial that's been finished now, and it was done in community mental health settings. And community mental health settings, we have a number in Western Sydney Local Health District and Parramatta, but it's a free community centre. So generally, patients who have been admitted to either the emergency department or they've been discharged from an inpatient unit, they get referred to community mental health centres. So they are often our more severe end of the spectrum of patients. It's a free service. There tends to be a fair bit of a wait list, but it's comprised of psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, nurses. And what we did, and this finished about 2 years ago, which was getting patients, and this was in youth, 16 to 25 years old, to wear one of these watches for up to 3 months. And we would track all their biometric data. So things like their sleep-wake cycle, their heart rate, their electrodermal activity. So that's the body stress response. And it was a randomized control trial. Some patients got feedback on what their biometric data was, and some didn't. The short of this was them getting feedback didn't make any difference, but we did find that it was very feasible. Everybody wore it. I think the clinicians were a little bit nervous, like, is this something that's just going to get ripped off? Who's actually going to wear the watch? But I mean, their youth, they liked it a lot. But we started developing a dashboard so that clinicians could start looking at this biometric data to have additional objective measures. You know, if you're tired, you go to the GP and you say, can I have a blood test? And you can have something to look at. In psychiatry, we don't have that yet. We're still asking people, how do you feel? They fill out questionnaires and scales, but we don't actually have any sort of objective measure. So we're trying to get the use of, you know, everybody has some kind of a watch on now, or some kind of gadget. So as it's becoming more common, can we integrate this into our clinics? Because we can't monitor patients every day all the time. They might come in once a week, once every few weeks. Sometimes they relapse, and we've done nothing to be able to prevent that. We can't intervene early enough. We've finished that trial, and now we're looking to continue it. So we are in the process of getting ethics together and more funding together. We're going to increase recruitment to around 100 people, and we're going to have it across several sites. So before we only had it here and Sydney Local Health District, we're looking to include in a regional site as well, out in Orange. Increase the wear time of up to 6 months. And we were talking about AI before, but create a AI alert system. So is there something about a combination of biometric data and a combination of clinical data, when we put it into the dashboard, can it detect relapse or clinical decline prior to relapse? I mentioned this before, but our circadian rhythms are largely based on genetics. So we don't actually change. We don't become, you know, early morning birds and night owls every few years. It's not something that changes often. We have clock genes that are about 50%, 40 to 50% heritability. And so we get this from twin studies. And this is the kind of breakdown of where, on a whole, we sit in terms of our chronobiology. About 20 to 30% of people are early birds or morning chronotypes. 20 to 30% are evening chronotypes, what we refer to as night owls. And the majority fit in between. So you can sort of guess a 9 a.m. meeting is disadvantaging about 30% of people. And late night meetings are disadvantaging the other 30% of people. Short sleepers, I've mentioned this. So a very, very small percent of the population can actually function on 4 to 6 hours of sleep. So one of the biggest challenges for sleep health today is that our modern environment often conflicts with our biology, and artificial lighting is a big contributor of this. We're using lights well into the evening. Our day is being pushed back constantly, but that's not in sync with our biology. So we have later bedtimes, still early work times, and school times with parents that also have to take their kids to school. Increased artificial light. It's not just from your phones or your laptops. I mean, we've got light on all the time. We're actually spending a lot more time indoors than our biology is meant to be. And reduce natural light exposure as a consequence of that. What that means is social jet lag, increased metabolic risk, obesity is a big one, I didn't put on this, reduced productivity and cognitive performance, mood disturbance, and disrupted immune function. So multiple nights or weeks of sleep restriction or sleep loss, and you're more at risk of getting sick. So what this means in the workplace, late night screens, still getting up early in the morning, you've got a circadian mismatch, if you remember that first slide early on. And 30% of people are being disadvantaged by early morning meetings and vice versa. So what can workplaces do? Insufficient sleep costs Australian economy over 18 billion annually. It's impacted by reduced decision making, reduced productivity, absenteeism, but also being present and cognitively absent as well. Workplace incidents and accidents. Adults require roughly 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night for optimal health, but above, just your working hours is your sleep regularity. So if anything you can take away, instead of using if you've got smart watches, instead of looking at the total amount of hours you've slept, it's better to look at how regular were my sleep and wake hours, because it's hard to then get a sufficient number of hours of sleep if every night you're sleeping and waking at different times. Some strategies for the workplace, core working hours, because the stats are 20 to 30% are going to be disadvantaged by working hours or meetings at either end of the spectrum, so 8, 9 a.m. or 6, 7 p.m. Hopefully you're not having meetings at 7 p.m., but so core working hours, something like 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., supporting healthy light exposure. So first thing in the morning, instead of the phone or a laptop, is natural light. And even if that's just 15, 20 minutes, that's actually a signal for your body to start its alertness and wakeness. Home dimmers, I think, this is a relatively inexpensive thing now, but once our melatonin is starting to increase from like 5 or 6 p.m., that's a nice time to start home dimmers. Using warm lights in the evening rather than the LED fluorescent lights. Reduce late night digital demand, so encouraging the right to disconnect culture. And scheduling your work with your biology, so knowing when you are at your peak and utilizing that time. So planning your demanding tasks in that peak alertness, and just in general, avoid the routine meetings very early or very late. Why high achievers may be poor sleepers. So some common characteristics, but not everybody has this. Cognitive hyperarousal, so problem solving, constant rumination at night, high stress responsivity, so elevated evening cortisol and physiological arousal, perfectionism, so your brain might be more active at night, so having these faster brain waves. And sleep isn't just, what are the 5 or 6 things that you can do before you go to bed. Good sleep health starts from first thing in the morning. It's natural light exposure. So coffee is one thing. Your cortisol peaks early in the morning, so around 8 a.m. So if it is possible to wait an hour after you've woken up to have your first coffee, otherwise you're adding cortisol to already a peaking cortisol. Physical activity helps build your sleep pressure. So I often recommend, instead of the late night meditation, go do an hour of aerobic exercise. It's a good way to build your sleep pressure in the day. If you don't have sleep pressure, late night relaxation and meditation only has a smaller amount of effectiveness. Keep your sleep and wake times consistent and digital wind down, and have a cognitive off-road. So writing all the things that you need to do for the next day out of your head on a piece of paper. So just some final takeaway points. We're looking at sleep clinically as an early warning signal, not just a symptom of a disorder. Sleep loss and irregularity has wide consequences for your cardiovascular health, your metabolic health, cognitive and psychological function. Wearables are good, but use them with caution, know its limitations. Everything that it gives you is not true, but it's just the proxy measure of your circadian rhythm. And clinically for us, it's a good tool for virtual care. And we have a conflict between biology and modern life, and a lot of it is around light. So it may be a negative, but there's a lot of positive use to it. So keeping your light dimmed in the evening, lots of natural light in the morning. Thank you.